Welcome back to this series of conversation at the Dark Reading News Desk at RSA. It's Terry Sweeney with Dark Reading, and joining me now is John Shier, Senior Security Advisor with Sophos. John, thanks for doing News Desk this year.
My pleasure, Terry. Thank you.
We know Sophos is planning to launch its 2022 Active Adversary Report this year at RSA. Can you give us a bit of a high-level overview of the report? Curious about some of the key findings that emerge from that.
Yeah, certainly. So we just dropped it today, so it's great. It's out there in the public
bravo.
right now. And there's some interesting points that some statistics that we pulled out of the data while analyzing it. And one of them was looking at dwell time. So dwell time is the time between when a network is, or a company is compromised and when they actually detect the attacker within the network. And there was a fairly substantial rise, 36% rise in median dwell time from last year. So it went from 11 days to 15 days. So while that is still a bit of a problem that attackers are running around in your network for 15 days, it gives you some time to actually evict them as well, right? And we think that the rise is due to a couple factors. There's been a lot of exploits this past year. So the data is from 2021. So that past year had some proxy logon and proxy shell, for example, were some of the exploits that contributed to, I think, that rise in dwell time.
Is it because they've overcome the technology protections that may have been in place? Is it because the attacks they're planning are more sophisticated? What's your guess there?
So what we think is happening is with respect to these vulnerabilities. So if we look at the root causes of the attacks, nearly 50% of them, so 47% of them, were actually due to exploiting a vulnerability. And so when you start looking at proxy shell and proxy logon, they're easy to exploit, they were widespread, and you look at the root causes being half of them exploiting vulnerabilities. Now you're starting to see something like the IABs, right, the initial access brokers. You're starting to see a pattern of them getting involved within the attack space that maybe they weren't as involved in previous years, but they're definitely part of the landscape now. So when a vulnerability like that comes out, like let's say a proxy shell, we immediately saw on the day that the public disclosure of the POC came out, we immediately saw 7 victims fall to that particular vulnerability, which is just telling you that IABs are out there scanning, they're targeting these companies, they're compromising them, and then they've got inventory on the shelf to sell to the ransomware crews. And so if we actually dive into the data a little bit with respect to dwell time, there's some variability in there as well. So for ransomware, it was 11 days of median dwell time versus the non-ransomware other breaches was 34 days. So you can kind of see where the activity IABs compromising organizations and then having that inventory sitting on the shelf waiting for the next person to buy that access in order to then probably ransom a company.
Wow. Any other interesting data points that emerged from the report?
So on a positive note, one of the things that we saw in the report this year was the reduction in the amount of attackers using RDP exclusively externally to get access to companies. So it went down 75%. Now the numbers aren't huge, it's 4% to 1% just for external only access. But I think what we can read into that is with the 2020 data, there were there's some things from the pandemic that were contributing to having a lot of RDP access, right? People were remote working, they were trying to figure out how do I get access to my networks, and so they were throwing a lot of externally, remote access tools out on the internet, and so that got pulled back, so that was great. But we also saw a shift towards other platforms as well, so things like TeamViewer and other remote access platforms were being abused, and we also saw a massive rise in the use of internal RDP. So internal RDP, being a ubiquitous, easy-to-use tool for administrators, is also being abused quite readily by the cybercriminals for lateral movement within compromised organizations.
Do you take heart in that? Does that suggest to you that the messaging and the training is actually getting through?
I think part of it, yes. I think there's definitely, the need to move slowly on some of these things sometimes, especially when you've got tools that are just so valuable and so useful that it's hard to pull them back sometimes. But yes, I think the fact that IT teams are realizing that there's certain things they can do to just shore up their defenses, shore up that foundation, and make sure that they're not making it too easy for attackers. And really one of those was let's get these remote access tools off the internet and then let's start protecting them with some multi-factor authentication as well. I think that's contributed to being able to protect networks as well. Yeah.
You mentioned ransomware a few minutes ago. It's pretty clear that attacks aren't slowing down. In fact, they're becoming just about ubiquitous. What is Sophos seeing here?
Well, yeah, we are seeing that. So, it's important to understand that in a lot of, when you look at telemetry, when you look at a lot of data, it's important to understand the bias in your data. So, this particular report is based on incident response. So, of course, ransomware is going to be featured quite prominently in that data because it's quite a loud and potentially damaging threat. But we are seeing, a steady ransomware going at a steady clip. There are some data points that suggest that maybe ransomware has had a little bit of a slowdown in terms of the frequency, but we are seeing more quality in the attacks. Right? We're seeing more complete compromises, and we're also seeing some shifts in tactics here and there. Some crews are starting to dabble with the data theft only, so they'll forego the encryption, knowing that there's a good chance you'll probably be able to recover using backups or something like that. However, if I steal your data, then I can still hold that to ransom for fear that the privacy commissioner might come down on you, or some governing body might impose a fine on you. So you might actually pay the ransom rather than pay the fine.
In that vein, Sophos also recently released a State of Ransomware report, found that the impact of a ransomware attack is immense, with nearly triple the amount of organizations that were hit, having paid more than $1 million in ransom. Does this suggest that we have reached the apex of ransomware, or is the sky the limit?
Yeah, I don't think we're at peak ransomware yet, and it's the kind of thing that you don't really know until you're on the other side of it, right?
Sure.
But so long as there's money to be made, and there's, it seems like there's an endless pit of victims, that potential victims, right, that these criminals can target, they're going to continue to use this threat as one of their big money makers. The economics of it, are just too lucrative for a lot of these crews. And then when we look at the impact that the Russian war on Ukraine is having, it seems like there's a bit more of a gloves-off mentality now from a sort of the Russia versus the West or versus NATO attitude, where this Russian state probably is not going to be doing a lot of hacking, but I bet you that the homegrown cyber criminals have been given a bit more of a pass in terms of causing pain to the West. So I think we might see some more attacks on critical infrastructure and healthcare and other organizations that in the past they might have stayed away from for fear of getting, drawing the attention of the FBI and other government organizations that can actually put them in jail.
John, talk about how real-time, human-led threat hunting can help organizations stop ransomware attacks in their tracks.
Certainly. So oftentimes it takes a human to catch a human, right? And when we look at this particular report, and when we read the threat reports of all our competitors in the industry, we often see that there are humans behind these attacks. It's not just automated attacks anymore. And automated tools do have a place. And I think if you're able to put prevention tools in place that can sort of limit the amount of bad stuff coming in, then you have a bit of a better chance to start looking at the remaining 50% and start working on that detection and response side of things, and looking at doing some threat hunting. But it really is a matter of security maturity at this point, right? So if you can lay that security foundation and make sure that you have the right, you're doing all the right patching, you're hardening identity, you're making sure that your external services aren't being needlessly exposed to the internet and other places, and you've got these prevention technologies, then you can start layering on that additional human-led threat hunting that is so crucial in finding a lot of these attackers that can lay buried inside networks for days, if not months.
Well, let's finish by talking about what that layered approach looks like. Why is it so critical in protecting, especially against something like ransomware?
Well, the layered approach, really, the whole paradigm behind that is that we acknowledge that not every technology is going to be fit for purpose for every threat and every scenario. So what you're going to want to do, and security is all about risk mitigation, right? So we're going to be trying to mitigate different types of risks in different parts of the environment. And that layered security approach is saying, okay, let's take an appropriate control and apply it at this point. And then we'll take another appropriate control and apply it at that point. And I've been saying this for years, it's like Swiss cheese, right? You've got, products have definite weaknesses, which are the holes in the slices of cheese, and if you layer enough of them on top of each other, you can kind of overlap and cover some of these weaknesses and come up with a more robust and secure environment. but it's not just about technology, right? It's about the people. And if you take the technology and you build a strong security culture inside your organization around that technology, then you're really doing a much better job at being able to stop these threats. Because once everybody from the CEO down to the loading dock know how important and crucial security is to the organization, then they're going to start acting accordingly and give you a real fighting chance against things like ransomware, but really against all threats that are out there today.
John, thanks for stopping by the Dark Reading News Desk. Great insights on the state of the threat landscape and the scourge of security professionals everywhere, ransomware. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Terry. It's my pleasure.
We've been talking with John Shier of Sophos. This has been Terry Sweeney for the Dark Reading News Desk. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.